Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of We the People. I am David Serpa. I'm running for governor here in California in 2026 because I know that one man did not destroy the state of California. It was not Governor Newsom alone. It's going to take more than one man to save the state of California. We need to do this thing together. We need to make sure that we have the three-part plan in place. Number one, we need the right players in the game. Number two, we need a mission statement we can all get behind. And number three, we need the organization to support those players because it wasn't just Newsom. It was the treasurer, Fiona Ma. It was the state controller, Malia Cohen. It was the superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurman. It was the insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara. It is all of these people together that have worked so diligently around the clock to make sure that this place is downright predatory to exist in, to where people are leaving. And one of those positions is Secretary of State, Shirley Weber. Now, I have been driving all over the state of California. I've been meeting with people, talking to them about the importance of the Secretary of State position. And there have only been two people in the last 10 weeks that understood just how important the Secretary of State's position is. Those two people are Brandon Day, who's the current president of the Lincoln Club of Orange County, and Christine Bish, who's up there in Northern California, and hopefully our next Secretary of State. I know that she's not ready to run right now. She keeps telling me, "I'm not doing it, Serp. I'm not there yet." But I've been going all over the place. I've been speaking to people, and I have been telling people on stages everywhere, do you guys know who Christine Bish is? You need to know. And this is why. We were at the state CAGOP, and I was having my usual monologue about how we have to find a good Secretary of State. We have to find a good controller to audit the state of California. We have to find a good attorney general to bring justice to the state of California. And all of a sudden, one of my favorite people, my favorite Bish, Chris Bish, and in all fairness, I don't know a lot of other Bishes, but she would probably still be my favorite Bish. She's walking by and she stops and she hears me talking about the Secretary of State's position. And she says, "You know what? People don't realize just how important the Secretary of State's position is." And she goes and she monologues at me for about 7 minutes straight about the Secretary of State position, everybody at the table. But we all stopped and we listened. And my good friend, Chris Zaragoza, Doc Zaragoza, says to me, "I felt like I was just listening to you talking about the Secretary of State position." So with that, I said, "Chris Bish, you are a nerd." And she said, "Nobody's ever called me a nerd before." And I said, "I know, but nerds are so useful because they know so much, which is very different than the dorks that we currently have in control." So my friend, Chris Bish, welcome to the show. It's good to see you. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm going to need to unmute you. Oh, I just muted you again. That was my bad. I apologize, my friend. Chris
No
Bish,
worries.
welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm so great now that I'm in the presence of the next Secretary of State of the state of
Don't push
California.
me.
I'm going to keep pushing it.
I know you are, and it's going to be being on programs like this where we have a chance to talk, have other people listen in that may sway me from my current race. And luckily,
Well,
we have lots of time.
and in your current race, you're running for Congress, and
Correct.
you've been working on a lot of things that are very interesting and important to a lot of people. Of one of those things is happening with Adam Schiff. You were ahead of the curve on that fact that you were the person that brought that to the forefront. Do you want to tell everybody briefly what's going on there with Schiff and what have you uncovered?
Okay, so right now we are waiting for a referral. I'm going to give you a little background on Adam Schiff. Elected in 2000 to the United States Congress. And he served his first term, ran again, and was sworn in January of 2003 for his second term. In June of 2003, he packed up, sold his house down in Burbank, and moved to Maryland, bought a house there. and has actually, done interviews where they've asked him about it and said, he's made no secret that he moved his family to Maryland since that's just where he was working. Okay, well, you're representing California, and I know it's a long trip, it's a big commute, but you signed up for it.
Hmm.
So what he did was he rented a furnished apartment, bought his house as his primary residence for tax purposes, for what do you call it? A cheaper mortgage interest rate, cheaper insurance on his home. So he bought it as his primary residence in Maryland, but yet turned around and rented an apartment, a fully furnished one bedroom apartment in California, and registered to vote here, as if that somehow made him a resident. Now, for the state of California, for voting purposes, and it's a little weedy, for voting purposes, you only need to inhabit the state. So technically, him doing that in California, under current California law, it qualified. But that meant he committed mortgage fraud. You cannot be a resident of the state of California, run for office, register to vote, and then turn around and claim you are a resident, a citizen of the state of Maryland to get a cheaper interest rate.
And a lot of people are picking up on that now. They're running with the story. I'm seeing it getting a lot of national headlines. You called me about that a long time ago. And
Yeah.
of course, you were ahead of that. So, what I want to jump into now is I want to jump into the Secretary of State position. A lot of people have no idea what the Secretary of State's position is. They think it's just about elections. They forget that there are 6 different divisions that fall under the Secretary of State's jurisdiction: the Executive Division, the Elections Division, Political Reform Division, Management Services, Business Programs, and the State Archives Division. You're probably the only person that I've talked to that understood the real depth of it. What is the Secretary of State's position, and what are they responsible for?
The Secretary of State, it really is simple. They are the record keeper. It is the archive. They are the person that tracks everything about California back to when we first became a state. They are the person, the librarian, the historian for the state of California, who holds all those records, whether it's legislative, it's a historical documents. It is the Secretary of State that is charged with embracing, protecting, archiving, and sharing the history of California, good and bad. All of our legislature, all of our businesses. Think about that. Corporate filings, whether it's corporations, limited partnerships, that is all managed and held by the Secretary of State. Also, if you're going to be a notary, which goes back to part of this business with Adam Schiff, is to be a notary, is they oversee that program.
They see a lot of different programs, and in
Yes, they do.
fact, they're part of what I call the business wing of the executive branch, which includes the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, the state controller, and the state auditor. Can you tell me just how important the secretary of state's position is for business?
For business, if you are operating either as a California corporation or even a foreign corporation, and what do I mean by that? Foreign could be another state. So we have, companies that are headquartered in Texas, Utah, Michigan, you name it. That's where they're headquartered, but they do business in California. So it's the connections and how it affects our industry in California, our economy. That is all managed by the Secretary of State.
That's
And
absolutely 100% right. People don't realize just how important the Secretary of State's position is for the economy, because they
yes,
really are your chief foreign relations officers, state to
yes,
state. The lieutenant governor is your foreign relations officer from our state to other countries, but Secretary of State, there's so much California to New Mexico and to Arizona into Colorado. And one of those things that I think about is water, how quickly we could figure out our water and energy crisis if we had the right person in the right place. What do you see the Secretary of State's position being able to accomplish if we got the right person in there?
Well, and we have going into this, we're going to start out with the Secretary of State's office. They are not a law enforcement agency.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what they do, but they have the ability to refer business crimes, and everything from human trafficking, you name it, anything they uncover, to refer to the Attorney General for the state of California, the Department of Justice, even local DAs in the cases of voter fraud.
What's really interesting about this, and I've been talking to people about how important it is to have the right 8 people in there working together. Because exactly like you said, the Secretary of State's office could uncover a lot of dirt, but it is the Attorney General who is your chief law enforcement officer for the state of California that then has to go and prosecute and see through that an audit has teeth, for example. You can pull the records, but the controller is the auditor for the financial
Mhm.
auditor for the state of California. So when you are working as Secretary of State's in the Secretary of State's office to do something like uncover, human trafficking, like what we were talking about, and you find that in the records, and in fact, let's scale this back a little bit. How important is it for a Secretary of State to have the right Attorney General in place?
It is absolutely required. And let's use Adam Schiff for an example, or Doris Matsui. Actually, I had uncovered first about Doris Matsui, um, and that's what led me to Adam Schiff. Because Doris had moved in 1979, left the state of California, and moved to Maryland, sold the house here on Gaggle Way in Sacramento, moved to Maryland, didn't even pretend to have a property here. What they did was she registered to vote at her father in law's house, a house she had never lived at. And they took up residency in Maryland, and she was a permanent absentee voter. Nobody ever checked it. There was It wasn't until I think 2008 that somebody had even brought it up. But when she ran after her husband had passed away, she ran for office. I think at that point, that is the duty of the Secretary of State, is to make sure the people who are registered to vote are the right people, that they've claimed the proper address. A lot of people forget, how powerful this position is. Um, it was, what was it, in 2020, 2019, young congressman from Oklahoma, and I'm going to move to Oklahoma for a second, Shawnee County, Oklahoma, West Point graduate, just an amazing, opportunity to have a great leader in Congress. And he registered to vote using a mailbox, a UPS mailbox. And he was caught, registered to vote at an address different than where he lived, and then subsequently voted in that election. Got 4 felony counts because they were on the ball in Oklahoma. California, I have presented the Secretary of State with hundreds of pages of evidence on Doris Matsui and on Adam Schiff. Now, the Secretary of State has made referrals for voter fraud and election fraud, but it's low-level stuff. When
And
it
what's
comes
really
to going after the
Go
big
ahead.
fish, they will not even acknowledge receipt of the complaints.
Mhm.
Luckily, I'm a hound dog, and I make sure I have certified copies and track who handles what. Pretty good at it.
It's very neurospicy of you to jump in all these records the way that you do and all this data the way that you do as diligently as you do. when you go off and you start talking about some of this stuff, the average person, their eyes start to gloss over because it's a lot of information to download. But the thing is data is important. Records are important. The paper trail is important. It shows you exactly what's happened. Often, crime leaves a paper trail. And when I look at something like the audits that were happening through Doge, or even the audits that were happening in the Department of Defense, because that's sort of something that in the Republican Party that we don't really look at is we look at the Department of Defense, which I think failed the seventh consecutive audit, 61% of $3.5 trillion.
Mhm.
What is an audit without teeth? It's like, it's one thing to get an auditor out there, looking at it like a controller. And it's another thing to have an attorney general that's willing to prosecute and say, where are these trillions of dollars? Where are these billions of dollars? Where are these millions of dollars? Um, I'm glad that we're starting to investigate these things in the state of California. And I'm glad that it's starting to pick up the sort of legs that it has, because I wrote about it in a book in 2019 saying that we need to audit the state of California. Chapter 8 of my book is Audit the State of California. How would a Secretary of State assist a state controller with an audit of the state of California?
Okay, so I don't want to gloss anyone over, but there's been a lot of chatter nationwide about the air traffic controllers, FAA, and how the computers are outdated. Some of them are still using floppy disks. We saw this with Doge, with the Social Security system, where everything are down in this document cave. I could probably go down there with a cup of coffee, and you'll see me in a week, just digging through everything. But it goes back to technology. California is the hub. It's the birthplace of technology. Silicon Valley. We have Intel, Microsoft. You name it. Oracle. All of these companies here in California. Yet in the Secretary of State's office, we have systems that are still running on an old programming code from the 80s called COBOL. It has absolutely no security. And I remember taking that in college back in 1984, which is incredibly frightening. Our first and foremost thing that we need to do to make all of this work is to invest in our infrastructure, meaning our computers, our data. Because right now there are so many security flaws. Anybody can hack into these systems. And they have, including our election systems. We are incredibly outdated, and it makes navigating things difficult. It's how can you know the history of a state or even a bill if you do not have the tools to track it, to care for it, to understand it, and even make the referral to law enforcement when laws are being broken? They have
Yes.
great marketing here in California. We really do. They can make anything look competent when
Well, I'll tell
behind
you
the
what,
scenes it's
people are
not.
getting really tired of, hearing that, oh, this law was broken or that law was broken without seeing any form of punishment whatsoever. And if you or I did the sort of things that happen every day in our government, we would be arrested. We would be in cuffs. And so, and also just when it comes down to scaling it back, you were talking about technology, and there's a book that was written by at the time Lieutenant Governor Newsom called Citizenville, and he talks a lot about tech because he was there in San Francisco, at the sort of the heart, at the forefront of all of it, and he was talking about the massive failures of government because of these legacy contracts that prevent them from really properly being able to serve the people with the technology that they have, because they've signed these 100-year contracts with people, with these companies at the very beginning of this technology, and now they're locked in
No, they're
indefinitely.
not. They're
Well, you and I
not.
both know that there's certainly a way around these 100-year contracts. They just don't want to do it. Tell me
I would
more
love
about
to get
that.
my teeth into some of those.
Well, that's what we need to do, though. We need to take
Yes.
out the teeth, and we need to sort of disentangle from the administrative and bureaucratic redundancies that happen currently in the Secretary of State's office. You're a records office. You're a data office. You're an archive. And so, why is that not digitalized at the Technology Center of
Well, of
Innovation and
course,
means
we
to
know
the
why
world?
it's not.
Why?
Why? Because it's easy
Transparency.
to
Talk to me about it.
hide. It's easy to hide. It's only nerds, as you like to call me, nerds like me who will dive in and dig through the papers. It's like reading VCR instructions. Yes, I still have a VCR, um, and I can tell you everything about it, how it works, because not only have I read the instructions, but I've gone into the fine print. So, one of the examples that I have found with the Secretary of State's office is back in the primary for 2022. The Sacramento County voter registrar had a contract for their election system. And the name of the company is irrelevant, it doesn't matter. But I understand that you have to have all of the contracts in place for whether it's the election system, who prints the ballots, who mails the ballots. There's all these different vendors that are involved. Well, the contract for the vote counting system in Sacramento County had expired, and the registrar missed it. Everybody missed that the contract had expired, and we went through that June primary. Well, because the contract for the election system made the machines uncertifiable. They're supposed to certify all these electronics, that everything works properly. And in 2022, and it's even worse going back to 2020, but in 2022, for that June primary, they were not in contract for the machines that they were using to count the ballots. So Sacramento County Board of Supervisors went to the Secretary of State to get permission to renew their contract, but make modifications to it and renew it retroactively, so the 2022 primary would have been legal. They're backdating legal documents to cover up how they screwed up a primary election in the state of California. That's insane. She should be sitting in a witness box.
What is the saying? Democracy dies in darkness. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Democracy dies in darkness. Now,
There's
it's
a reason for old technology and everything not working, and bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats, who really hold the reign of power in California.
and when you talk about this sort of stuff on social media, these are the only videos that tend to come down is when you're talking about the transparency in those systems. And I don't even want to say the word elections in the same word because then the video automatically comes down. But the thing is I absolutely agree with what you were talking about these vendor contracts, because those come in to play more than people realize. I mean, even with things like what's now Blue Triton brands, but what was Nestle, and the amount of water that they were taking out of the San Bernardino forest. They
Mm-hmm.
were going on an expired contract for 60 years, taking billions of gallons of water every year. And we talk about the water crisis, the water mismanagement. There's a lot of people that have plenty of water, and a lot of these contracts sort of happen in uh, closed door sessions that end up having people's riparian rights negotiated away. I mean, that's what happened with the Resnicks up there in the Bay Area. Is all of a sudden Californians lost a lot of their water rights in a session that they weren't even involved in. Uh, so all of this nerd stuff is very important, right?
It
It's all
really
very important.
is.
But how do you take it to a level of transparency so that all of the people on X that are wired in a way that they want to dive in and they want to investigate this stuff, what sort of documents are you uploading so that there's more transparency, so that you have more help? what records are you making public, and how are you making them accessible?
Okay, what's cool about every document that I publish or provide to media outlets is public record. And I absolutely love public record, especially when we're dealing with Democrats. They love to hide in plain sight. And because the way our systems are, everything is so convoluted, and nothing works together, it makes it easy to hide. It gets lost in the chaos. Luckily, I thrive on a atmosphere of chaos. It's everything is so clear. While you're watching what somebody's doing over here with this hand, a magician, nobody's looking at what the other hand is doing.
Hmm.
And that's where I go, is right to what the other hand is doing. So how do we put this on social media? It's salacious. We have to turn what is boring, mortgage records, reading, 25, 30 page finance documents, or actually reading the fine print on voter registration, or understanding the Constitution and what it says about whether it's the state constitution or the US Constitution, understanding the jobs and the qualifications, and how it fits in modern time, and what was the original intent of the framers, and more importantly, how has it been bastardized in current with current legislation.
And I
We're
think
we're
that
doing this fight over the 14th Amendment and parents' rights.
there's a lot. I mean, even when I was going through my contract with California yesterday, where I was talking about this is in reference to the 10th Amendment right here. The Constitution really is a great framework for understanding what is going on and what shouldn't be going on,
Hmm.
and providing people with an understanding of what they're looking at, and education in the process is so incredibly important. That's why we're doing the show. I appreciate you joining me to talk to people about this. So when people hear something like management services or business programs or state archives, elections, political reform, um, what does any of this mean to your average person? If they send you in to go get to work, or they send the next Secretary of State, I know you haven't in any way, shape, or form agreed to this, but they send the next Secretary of State into Sacramento. What should they expect out of this person? What should they be? In fact, and I'm sorry, there's so many things that I want to ask you. I keep jumping all over the place. What would you expect out of the next Secretary of State going into Sacramento?
The first thing is, I am an election integrity hawk. And it's not about whether who won an election and who didn't. We have to be fair. There has to be equal justice, equal enforcement, and it has to fall within the guidelines of the Constitution. It also has to be economically feasible. So the legislature, and there's a lot going on. So we have the legislature who passed these mail-in ballots. And we've got to also respect the separation of state power and the federal power, right? So, states' rights. It's huge, but we need to make sure that everyone is on an equal playing field, that everyone is treated the same, good and bad. So there's some bad players out there that need to be exposed. Adam Schiff, Doris Matsui, making sure that they follow the letter of the law. More importantly, that they are elected leaders and they need to lead by example. So we need to get in there and confirm who's who. I mean, they just had a story about Senator Tuberville, that he may be registered to vote in a different state than what he represents. We watched them do this to RFK Jr. in New York, where they said that he shouldn't have been the state senator because he maintained a property just for voter registration. And I read that entire court case. It was a civil case that was brought, and the Democrats that went after uh, RFK Jr., they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he maintained the address in New York just so that he could register to vote and serve as the senator. He's actually a resident of the state of California. And what was brilliant about it is so there was no criminal referral, and there very well could have been. And I don't show bias that way. I probably would have referred it to a criminal court. Uh, all truth be known, whether I like him or not, and I do. But what he did was wrong, and there shouldn't have been an exception for that. However, that is the job of the Secretary of State. I think we need to go in there and clean up our own housekeeping. So the
Hmm.
next Secretary of State is going to be charged with one. We need to audit the people that are there, find out who's ineffective, and we've seen this with Doge, where people who are in these different organizations, they are coming forward saying, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. I've had the benefit of meeting several people who are now retired from the Secretary of State who have just been amazing about sharing information, especially because, at least in my area, it's well known that I am an election integrity hawk.
Hmm. And you know what? I'm glad that you brought it back there because when people hear that, especially people on the Democratic side of things, they think, okay, election denier. This is somebody who's going to make things difficult for people to vote. Um, Explain to people, what does that mean, election integrity hawk? And then I have another question for you. What is an election integrity hawk?
Okay, that is someone who believes in following the letter of the law when it comes to our elections. That is the most important job uh, in safeguarding who the representatives in Congress, in our state legislature, in the state Senate, the state assembly, all the way down to school board. It is so important. And that's not an election denier. A denier would be blaming it on anything. What I'm talking about is making sure that we are audit proof. And
There it
that's
is.
what the Secretary of State should be doing, that every contract is done properly. They've got an
Hmm.
army of lawyers that are being used to cover things up, not
Hmm.
say, you know what, you're out of date on this contract. And it's
Hmm.
going to be embarrassing and it's going to be inconvenient and it's going to be expensive, but we need to rerun this election.
Yeah, well, it's about transparency and it's about
Yes.
being audit proof. You want to be able to have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. And the thing is I'm not designed in a way that I love contracts and I love to look at all the records, but that means that I have to surround myself with people that are, you know,
Yeah.
designed that way. And I look at what you're saying, it makes a lot of sense about making elections fair. And one of those things that I don't think is fair or economically feasible is one of the ways that we gatekeep in the election cycle, the way that we keep candidates out of the process to engage in our republic, to run for office. Can you tell me some of these barriers that people face when they're running for office, just trying to get started in their campaign?
Okay. Uh, Here we go. It's um, it's not a barrier, and this is one of those safeguards. It's that you run for office in the district, uh, in the jurisdiction where you live. And I'm a real estate agent, have my own real estate company for years, and it's about no. It's we have people who are carpetbaggers. Adam Schiff turned himself into a carpetbagger, running in California when he's really a resident of Maryland. If you're not here, you're not part of the community. And this is why I love talking to realtors and getting realtors running for office and ex cops as well, because they are the boots on the ground. They know their communities, where people work, where they play, where they live, where they go to school, where they shop. And they just understand it's that connection to the community. And it's just amazing uh, how intimate it is. Now, one of the problems that we have is we get people who don't live in these communities, who don't understand us. And at that point, it's, how do you elect someone? One of the other pitfalls is Alex Padilla, who was the former Secretary of State. He got us signed into contracts, long-term, multi-million-dollar contracts to change our election system. And I backtracked it. It turned out it went all the way back to Obama Zuckerberg giving money to the states in order to, it goes to the mail-in ballots, the collection boxes, who actually works at the polling places. And that's a whole nother hour at least. But the point to it is when they start doing these things and breaking the law, it makes it harder. So the Obama Zuckerberg grant money that was given to the state of California, and each county within the state of California has dried up. Now, the elections office, or in the county level, because all the county voter registrars go to the Secretary of State, and they're the ones who set the rule for the local registrars. But what they've done, going back to Alex Padilla, is we have the counties in these contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts, to create election seasons with the help of the legislature, of course, where election day, as written in the Constitution, is now election months.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 3-month process. The month before, the month of, and the month after. And what makes it difficult is our election system is insolvent. The county registrars are not a revenue generating office. So what they've done across the state is increase the cost of a candidate statement. So when I ran in 2020, my candidate statement was $4,750. When I ran in 2024, a candidate statement jumped to $18,050, and that was only an estimate. And it was based on the shortfall. And so what they had to do is they had to pass the costs for everything that they had incurred, all the changes that they made, the laws that were changed to service this nonprofit group that, and Sacramento only got $8.3 million, and they have put us in massive debt. So they've got to raise that money somewhere. So how do you get someone who wants to run for office? We just had someone here run for a school board seat, and his candidate statement was $5,000 for an unpaid school board seat. You're eliminating the ability of maybe someone who's retired, who can invest their time, their heart, their passion into a school board race. And you've just made it, given them the inability to put in a candidate statement.
Correct. And that's one of the gatekeepers, the barriers of entry that I was really referencing.
Yep.
When talking about the way that they keep your average everyday person away from the being able to engage in the democratic process, there's a lot of things that are confusing. You go in there and they say, hey, you need to gather 40 valid signatures of voters and that are registered to vote, and then and they say you could collect a maximum of 60. And then I go in the first time that I ran for office, and I give them the maximum of 60, and they disqualified 22 of them. And next thing you know, I wasn't able to run for office. And so it's that way. They don't tell you, oh, you could turn in 120 if you want to. You could turn in 200, but just 40 of them have to be valid. And then you wasted an entire cycle trying to get on the ballot, thinking that you could only turn in 60. And then you get on the ballot, and then you find out that your candidate statement is $18,000 if you want to reach registered voters for a paragraph about that long. And it's a way that they keep one candidate from being able to reach voters because they don't have the money for it, which is another one of those stupid things that are so incredibly frustrating, because then you as a voter, you look at that and you think, oh, well, that person is just lazy. They didn't issue a candidate statement. Now, Governor Newsom on his own podcast the It's Gavin Newsom show. Um,
I wonder if he'd
talk.
have me on. Probably not since I sued him.
I don't think that you're going to be at the top of his list. I think that he's looking for kind of the friendly adversaries that he could have a little bit of repartee, not someone who's going to serve him with his next lawsuit.
The
So
subpoena. Hey, that case has already been settled.
yeah,
I won. He had to release. He released the emergency order on the state of California. So the Ninth Circuit said my lawsuit against him was moot. But we were winning in the Ninth Circuit, and absolutely right. The judge came back and said I had standing. So his only way out of that was to release the emergency order.
explain that to the people that don't know what you're talking about. So why did you sue Governor Newsom?
Okay, because the lockdown was unconstitutional. Even the people who were willing to surrender their freedom for that first 2 weeks to slow the spread or whatever their thing was, it was unconstitutional to mandate that. And hindsight is 2020. What they did was wrong, but then he kept extending it,
Mm-hmm.
and he violated the emergency power, which he shouldn't have had to begin with. So we weren't allowed to have rallies. At the time I was running for Congress, and I put in to do a rally at the state capitol because we weren't allowed to go door knocking. I couldn't host events. So I put in to have a rally at the capitol. We had already seen all the rioting, all the vandalism. Nobody was getting arrested. So there was no problem with people being together. So I put in for a permit at the state capitol to hold a rally, and I got back this unreasonable list of conditions if I wanted to hold a rally, that I couldn't have more than 500 people. I had to guarantee that everybody would social distance, that everyone would wear a mask, that if there were two children from two different families, that they wouldn't play together. And it just went on and on and on. It was ridiculous. So I was going to all the rallies, have great pictures. When they started arresting people, they sent out I don't know, hundreds of CHP dressed like stormtroopers. And a lot of them weren't wearing masks until a photographer, freelancer for the Epoch Times, my daughter, one of my daughters, brought it up to one of the cops, and then all of a sudden they started putting on masks. So we actually use those photographs as evidence in the case. But the point is they extended the lockdown beyond anything that could even be construed as reasonable under the Constitution.
Yeah, and what's wild about that is, we've talked about a lot of our amendments during the course of this show so far, but that First Amendment is extraordinarily important, and I don't see
Yes.
where it says in the Constitution that you should have to apply for a permit or you require, event insurance or all this different stuff that has become a part of the permit process. And I remember I had applied for a permit on Inauguration Day of 2020, and it was an anti-war rally when President Biden was going to be getting inaugurated. But two
Mm-hmm.
weeks prior was the January 6th thing, and so they ended up shutting down, pulled my permit, and told me that I was no longer allowed to gather because they were nervous. And I said, listen, people need to come and they need to be heard and they need to be able to exercise their ability to speak freely. But there's sort of the shutting down of free speech that gets cheered on from one side when it happens to the other side and cheered on from the other side when it happens to the other side. I'm like, listen, I want everyone to be able to just talk, to be able to have a conversation. If you're ignorant, let's sound it out. If you're right, if I'm wrong, I'm always willing to. But what happened was during that time, during COVID, I was writing a book, and I'm a pretty introverted, isolated type person at my best. And I was like, oh, this is great. I don't have to talk to anybody while I'm writing my book. But you're right, it just kept extending and extending. And then what happened was, next thing you know, his kids are in school. Plump Jack is open for business, but the rest of us still have our businesses shut down. Our kids are at home. We're unable to work. And but I'm glad that you sued him. I'm glad that you were that he stepped down when it got passed up the courts and it was looking unlikely like he was going to win.
Of course,
But
that took a couple years, but I was doing those rallies out in front of the Capitol. We were there on January 6th. We had
yeah,
zero issues. I was in absolute control of the couple of thousand friends that showed up.
mhm,
And because we weren't allowed to do it on Capitol grounds, I rented a flatbed truck and we did it on the street in
yeah.
front of the Capitol, even had porta potties dropped off. And it's understanding your rights and the limitations of government and government officials.
Well, free speech was not meant to protect comfortable speech. And the thing is
Exactly.
even when people are exercising their free speech and I disagree with them, I still want them to be able to speak.
Yes.
And that's how I feel about it. Now, when you look at what Governor Newsom said on his own podcast, he was talking about our elections in the state of California with Charlie Kirk, and he starts laughing, saying, "I know our elections are a big mess, and and I get it and whatnot, and like it's a big freaking joke." But there is no reason why it should take 30 days to count ballots when it used to be something that we got the vote tallies that night. Um, and so, why did it become election month, Chris Bish, and how do we get it back to election day?
They sold their souls. It all went back to the election systems. Now this was Alex Padilla, and if a race is a landslide, they can't cheat.
Hmm.
If it's close, they can. And it went back to Obama and Zuckerberg trying to fundamentally change our country.
How
So they
so? Because when you say things like they sold their souls, the average person, is going to look at that, and myself included. I'm going to say, is that a little bit of hyperbole? What do you mean by sold their souls?
money,
And what do you
money.
mean by with Zuckerberg? Let's be more specific. Pull back the
Okay,
curtain and tell people what you mean by that.
what I mean by that is we have been running elections in this country since our founding. And the one that resonates with most people, we go back to Ronald Reagan. We elected him in a landslide across this country. Was it Jimmy Carter got what, two states?
Hmm.
Something like that. And we knew the results that night. And it's because we were still following the elections were local. You voted in a local garage, in a library, in a church. They tabulated there and it moved up. And we
Hmm.
didn't have the technology that we have now, but it worked. And people showed their ID. You knew who was voting and who was eligible to vote. But it's evolved under it started with Congress doing the Motor Voter Act. Supposedly it was to get everybody to register to vote, to get more voters. And what
And
it's
why is that financially lucrative?
uh
To extend this the way that they extended it, why would Zuckerberg want to be involved in the
it's
voting
about
process?
control. It's about
Okay.
control, and they want to make sure, not Democrats. I'm not going to say Democrat. I'm going to say progressive liberals.
Hmm.
This goes to Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, about taking over elections, controlling them, where we are making our election system more convoluted, where it takes months, feeding into the laziness of some people. Oh, don't worry, we're going to mail it to you, fill it out. You got a month, get it back to us. Um, it is their way to be able to manipulate. Not saying that they have in all elections. But there's a lot of things going on. Sacramento County having systems that can't be certified. Well, if it's a Scantron, there's nothing to certify.
So two things. One, there are obvious tragedies that happen. Like, you can't identify as a veteran, with on the ballot. You can't call yourself a veteran. I think that's a shame. But to play the devil's advocate here for a moment, you've got the number one technology state in the country. That's what we are. Or
Mm-hmm.
in the world, we lead the world in innovation. Yet I look to these things like back when we had paper ballots. I remember going with my mom to go vote in a garage. And I remember that that's where they used to count everything up and then they would pass it up the chain of command. Why not? Why, two things. When we have all of this tech and all of this innovation, Why is it not moving more quickly with more transparency than it was back when we had paper ballots being counted in a garage?
Well, I have my opinion about that because I'm not the one passing the law or implementing the law. But,
Hmm.
when things are sloppy and chaotic, you can get away with a lot.
Hmm.
You can manipulate things or not manipulate them. Just throw your hands up and say, well, we did the best we could, and the incumbents stay in. So we don't have new ideas, we don't have new thoughts, we don't have innovation. Um, Here is a great example. As California is moving to a mail-in ballot, right, where we mail a ballot to every voter, not necessarily that they're currently a registered voter, but to every voter on the books, whether they've moved out of state or not, because they don't maintain those records, right, with voter registration. We saw the IRS. I don't know, you're old enough, you probably remember the IRS used to send a 1040 form to every adult, and you got the booklet on how to complete a 1040. Well, the federal government, the IRS, had determined that it wasn't necessary. Technology had changed. You can now file your tax return online. So for young people, for the Gen Zs, they never knew that the IRS sent this form to every adult because it was waste. It was environmentally wasteful, economically wasteful. It costs too much money. Now, you look in California, they're mailing out all of these ballots, and each individual voter registrar is producing the ballots, right? Designing the ballots. For California, it goes outside to outside vendors because you have mandatory vendors with your election system who you're going to use for printing and mailing. Our election systems are broke, and it is to maintain inefficiency. All of these computer systems that they're running to verify signatures. Now, here's the cool part. I love hypocrisy as well. I'm going to switch gears for just a second. It's part of
Hmm.
being a nerd.
Sure.
Is the Secretary of State is responsible for licensing and managing notaries, notary republic. So if you buy a house, you sign a legal document, there's someone there who looks at your ID and verifies that you are the person signing this document. Hypocrisy. It is the Secretary of State's office that says you don't need ID, you don't need to prove who you are in an election.
Mm.
Isn't that just a trip?
So you got to prove who you are if you're going to buy a house, but not an election.
You got
So
to prove who you are if you want to pick up a prescription. You have to show ID. You have to
okay,
prove who you are to buy
so
spray paint, but you don't to vote.
so voter ID, I get it. I really do get it. I think it just makes sense. Question though, this is one of the things that I struggle with, and I'm just going to be 100% transparent about it. I'll probably get some hate from my own side about this, but I look at paper ballots and I'm like, oh well, why not just move to stone ballots? Why not just we'll chisel everything in stone? Why go back when I look at the
We're
amount of
not.
tech and we could have an instantaneous vote count and
David,
a digital footprint,
David, what do you get in the mail?
a
When
bunch
the
of junk.
Secretary of State sends out ballots in the mail, what
Yes,
is that ballot made of?
paper.
It's not about the paper ballot, it's about counting them.
Okay.
It's and part of it has to do with going through the mail, right? It's not necessary. We
Hmm.
have a deadline, we have a cutoff, we have a constitutional um, requirement to have an election day. It
Hmm.
doesn't say election season. So if you have to go, and you don't have to go, if you choose to vote, because it's a choice, it's not a mandate,
Hmm.
if you choose to vote, what is the problem with going to a place that is designated to accept your ballot,
Hmm.
have you vote, and you go off about your business?
Sure. I have, no issue with it. I think that's the way that everything's been
Right, but
happening for a
it's
long
the
time.
argument over a paper ballot is moot because they're mailing you a paper ballot. It is about how it is being counted, how it's being collected. And that's
Sure.
when you lose the chain of custody. Now we're going back to legal jargon, and it's if in a murder scene, you find the knife and you pick it up and you handle it. Well, that evidence may be inadmissible because someone found the knife, picked it up, turned it in, and they can't source where you actually found it. It's your word against the defendant. Um, your fingerprints are now on it, and it smudged this person's. You may have just gotten someone out of a crime because you didn't know not to handle it, not to change it. One of the other things that goes on with our elections, and it's not about paper ballots, but it's called adjudication.
Hmm.
And that's where you've got someone that was hired through a temp agency. Their last job was, a cashier at McDonald's, but thanks to the state, they no longer have cashiers. You have to do it on a computer. Your job is to look at a ballot and decide if the voter put in check 2 marks for president, voted for 2 people, and look at the other races they voted in and adjudicate. Try and figure out what was in that voter's mind. Oh, they really meant to vote for Trump because of everybody else that they voted for. And
See, and
we
this
don't
is the
need
kind of
to,
thing, when I look at this, it
that
seems
should be
like
a disqualification.
it would be easier if the whole thing was digitalized. If because every laptop has a thumbprint, every cell phone has a thumbprint. You could upload your data. It almost seems like it would be streamlined even more so. Um,
Has your
and
have your uh, debit card ever been hacked?
oh, sure, definitely.
Exactly. Just because technology is cool
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it's secure, that it's safe. Do you
Okay.
know how many people I know in the state and federal government that have had their information hacked?
So it's about creating a paper ballot. Paper ballots are about creating safe, secure elections with a paper trail that cannot be hacked.
Exactly. And how do we do this? It is so simple. We have the ballots,
Hmm.
right? And you go in with your ID and they give you a ballot. It's not a ballot that's pre-printed for you for your district because you have a voting place. And for everybody within a jurisdiction, this is the ballot that you get.
Hmm.
And then you cast your ballot, and at the bottom is a perforated receipt. Only you, as the voter, can link you back to your ballot. And at any time, you could check. That's safe. That's secure.
It seems like that makes plenty of sense to me, my friend.
And
We
it's
are
free.
approaching the hour mark, and I knew that we were going to geek out on this Secretary of State position a little bit. In conclusion, what do you have to tell people about? In fact, why don't we do this? Let's take a step back. What are you working on now? What do you want people to know about Chris Bish?
Okay, so I am going to be on with a gentleman by the name of Mike Netter. I'll be on his program this evening at 4 o'clock. We're going to be talking about the Adam Schiff case, the evidence, where it's at now. And currently, I am running for Congress. So if you want to know more about me, you can go to bishforcongress.com, BISH for Congress.com. At that point, there is a place on the website where you can send me notes, comments. You can even meet me on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And if you think I'm a better suit for Secretary of State, that is a great place to chime in or ask me questions about election integrity, or about the Secretary of State, about our voting, about our taxes, about our leadership. And I don't know everything, but it is that conversation and it's someone to ask and challenge me.
Hmm.
I'm all about being challenged. It's tell me why. And not a drumbeat, not a mantra, but the ability to talk and communicate to people That's what I'm excited about, and making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity. And for those of you who think that I just go after Democrats, I've got news for you. I got a whole lot of Republicans. A liar is a liar, a thief is a thief, and I don't care what party you're in.
Mm,
I'll hold you accountable.
ferocious. That's your Bish right there, Chris Bish. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Bish. If you are interested in Chris Bish running for Secretary of State, give her a call, give her some love on social media. Tell her if you think that you want to keep her in that congressional position, let her know that too. I just look at it like she would be one of 535 members of Congress, or she could be one of one Secretary of State in the state of California. And we need a big brain in that position. We need somebody who's going to be willing to be challenged, who's available to their constituents, who's willing to have a dialogue and say things like, and this is what I love about Chris, challenge me. If I'm wrong, let me know that I'm wrong, because we're about a pursuit of something better. We're about a pursuit of a little bit of information and the betterment of humanity right here in California. So thank you all for tuning in. Everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the 519 gubernatorial appointed positions. We'll be back to talk about the Bernie and AOC's fighting oligarchy tour, and then on Monday is our human trafficking show. We'll be back with Rudy Gonzalez, Lori Gonzalez, and Matthew Kennedy. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.